Former President Donald Trump pleading not guilty to 34 felony counts earlier this afternoon, marking the first time in U.S. history that a former president is facing criminal charges. But how much do today's events alter the political landscape ahead of the 2024 election, if at all? To help us answer this, Niall Stanage, the Hill White House columnist, joining us now. Nice to see you. How do you, as you watch today's events, extraordinary history unfolding before us, how do you feel this impacts our political divide?
I think there are a couple of ways, really. The first is just watching these events unfold today. The imagery itself is so striking. Yes, of course, we anticipated this day coming. We've known about it for several days. But when you actually see former President Trump in a courtroom or walking through the halls of the criminal court in Manhattan, it does hit differently. Now, against that, the legal documents that I'm reading so far don't contain a whole lot of surprising or unexpected information. So politically, we still have to see how this plays out. Obviously, he's a candidate for the presidency again. There is some possibility that Republican voters might rally around him. How this plays with the general public, with an eye to a possible future presidential election, that's a more complicated question.
And now, taking that into account, I guess, how do you see it potentially doing that? Because I think one of the massive arguments out there is that it's actually going to damage him in the general election if he is the GOP candidate.
Yeah, I think that is a real concern from his side, Seana. There are a number of elements to that. One is the fact that, of course, he did struggle badly with female voters in 2020. He lost suburban women by almost 20 points. So we know this case is going to stretch on for a long time. Maybe he'll be convicted, maybe he'll be acquitted. But what we are going to be hearing a lot about are rather lurid accounts of alleged extramarital affairs. Is that going to hurt him further, particularly with female voters? So that's one issue. The other is Republicans worried about having a potential nominee who is under criminal indictment, who is charged with a crime. That, to a general public, to the general election electorate, has obvious dangers.
For the time being, his potential opponents have rallied around the former president. I'm talking about, of course, Ron DeSantis and Nikki Haley and Mike Pence. What could change that dynamic?
One thing that could change it, I think, quite readily is if the former president or people close to him engage in very inflammatory rhetoric. There's already controversy, which you may be aware of, about a social media posting from the president's oldest son, Donald Trump Jr., which includes a photograph of the daughter of the judge in this case. That kind of thing, anything that is redolent of some sort of incitement, I think, could change that. Obviously, the former president has already suggested that there could be death and destruction. That was before he was even charged. So that kind of rhetoric, I think, does add to a sort of atmosphere of chaos around him. And we're seeing other candidates or potential candidates put themselves forward as conservatives without the chaos. Those kind of appeals could get louder and sharper if this goes on.
Now he's expected to return to Florida, speak tonight at Mar-a-Lago, talking about rhetoric. What do you expect his rhetoric to be tonight?
Well, Donald Trump is Donald Trump. His rhetoric is what it is. I would expect to hear a lot about political persecution, as he calls it. I'm sure he will contend that he's a victim of a politicized witch hunt. And in saying these things, there is clearly an audience that agrees with him. I mean, he is still very popular with Republican voters, and I'm sure that they will be further inflamed or revved up by that kind of rhetoric. One aide, Jason Miller, says that his campaign has raised $8 million since news of this indictment broke a few days ago. So that points to the support that he still has, and he will be wanting to solidify and intensify that support with whatever remarks he makes this evening.
How indicative of our times is that they are raising money on indictment to pay off a porn star. This is the Republican Family Values Party. Just going to let that sit. What do you make of the timing here? Legal experts tell me it's probably a year before trial, which brings us right into primary season with this trial playing out.
Yeah, it absolutely does. And that's a really important point, Dave. We're now going to have the front runner for the Republican nomination going through potentially that entire process while under criminal indictment. Now, we do have to put a couple of caveats around that. It's quite plausible that his lawyers will seek to have the charges dismissed, for example. But he will be going forward while presumably attacking this process, but while having to also fend off these charges. This, once again, with Donald Trump, is going to be the kind of primary season that we have never seen before. It's really an unprecedented situation. A former president trying to seek the office again while charged with a crime. I mean, we're really, it's such a cliche, but we're into uncharted waters yet again.
Yeah, how possibly could he run essentially from the courtroom?
Well, he could run by saying that he is a victim here, and he has painted himself that way already. He has also tried to expand that argument to suggest that liberal or democratic elites are pursuing him as a way to thwart his political ambitions and thereby thwart the people who support him. So there's this idea put forth in Trump circles that that sort of mysterious forces are trying to get him to punish or to push back against his people, to punish his voters. Whether you believe that or not is an entirely different matter, but certainly that paradigm is put forth a lot by the Trump people.
I don't mean to lessen these charges, because reading through the indictment, this is undoubtedly a crime, but in comparison to the potential far more serious Georgia election investigation, could this have some impact on that?
Yes, it could. I mean, I take your point that Georgia in particular is just far more serious in terms of the underlying behavior. It's very difficult to argue that hush money payments to Stormy Daniels in any way endanger American democracy. I mean, they may be a crime, but they're not existential questions. In Georgia, you have a taped phone conversation of the then sitting president of the United States calling the Secretary of State and asking, threatening really, that person to find enough votes to overcome President Biden's margin of victory there. That seems on its face a much more serious case. Now, you could argue perhaps that by Alvin Bragg having gone first here in Manhattan, perhaps it makes it easier for the prosecutor in Georgia, Fani Willis, to go forward. But the flip side of that is the kind of shakiness of this Manhattan case, honestly, will clearly be used by President Trump and his allies, former President Trump, to portray all of these probes as part of the same picture, a picture that he considers unfair and victimizing of him. Yeah,
one could argue it makes that case more difficult to present if, to your point, if in fact this doesn't go all the way. Love to continue this conversation. Really enjoyed it. Niall Stanage, The Hill White House columnist. Thank you, sir. Appreciate it.
Thanks, guys.